And Nicolas Maduro has reportedly given number of mines to TDA in Western Venezuela and said, here, these mines are yours. You mine them as you please, and all the proceeds go to you. So this is his way of paying them. So TDA will mine mine the gold, and then turn and sell that gold in the United States or Europe, and then turn those funds back into the organization. So they're utilizing funding from these gold mines in Western Venezuela. This is not a secret. I mean, it's been reported that it's happening in Colombia. Different cartels are doing it. The Chinese have had mines that they've taken over in Ecuador or Colombia. And so it's happening in Venezuela. So they've got deep pockets of funding when they want to. And that's what I'm saying is this is not going away.
The opinions of the guests and host are their own and do not represent the opinions of Ironclad, the Border Patrol, or the Department of Homeland Security.
We cut through the partisan talking points. We're not interested in perpetuating fear. We're interested in seeking truth, hearing what's really going on America's borderland. Welcome to Borderland, an Ironclad original. My next guest is Daniel Brunner, who was a 29-year government employee, most of that being spent with the FBI. First language was Spanish, so he focused a lot of his time on Latin American gangs such as MS-13, and what we're going to talk about today is TDA, Tren de Aragua. So you guys, I think you're going to like this episode. It talks a lot about them and some of the things we need to look out for in the future. Check it out. Hey, Daniel, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us on Borderland. We have some history, and so I'm really excited to have you on board and to talk about the TDA, Tren de Aragua. I have trouble saying that all the dang time, but our first conversation was offline. We were talking about the subject, and I said, you know what, I'd love to have you on the show. If you wouldn't mind, for the viewers and listeners, can you give your background, a little bio of who you are?
Sure, Rock, I appreciate it. So spent 29 years working for the government. Joined the Navy when I was 21 years old. Spent 9 years in the Navy, active duty on a surface ship. And 3 of those years at the Naval Academy as an instructor. And then post 9/11, the FBI was recruiting heavily. I speak Spanish fluently. It's my first language. So they're looking for people who can speak multiple languages. FBI Baltimore was recruiting there at the Naval Academy. I raised up my hand. I said, sure, why not? Let me give it a shot. I didn't think I had a chance in hell, but it took me a year. I reported to FBI Academy in September of 2003. 17 weeks of training there. And then my first office was FBI Newark, New Jersey. And I never left. Spent 4 years in the international terrorism branch, 4 years in the domestic terrorism branch, investigating white supremacy, and then 12 years in the gangland. Predominantly working all Hispanic gangs because of my language. I was able to there's a big Hispanic community there in New Jersey. So I was able to, MS-13 was my main thing, but Trinitarios, which is a Dominican gang, and Tren de Aragua, much later on in my career, right at the end. But those were my 3 wheelhouses of MS-13 was the lead dog, and I investigated them for 12 years, New Jersey, international, national. So New Jersey, national at the United States level, helping other divisions, and then internationally for headquarters, I was part of a task force that went after MS-13 in Mexico and leadership in El Salvador. And then recently retired now residing in Bozeman, Montana with my wife and kids.
Man, I love it. It's a cool career. Especially some of the stuff you've done in the gang side of things. Obviously, the terrorists here in our country, that kind of world is always fun. But, for this show, I really want to focus on TDA because we've had interviews before in the past with MS-13. We've extensively gone through it for several other people, so we understand the origins of it, how it started, kind of from LA, also deporting some of them down to El Salvador and causing the issues there. It was a big issue for me growing up as a kid, knowing that MS-13 was around. They were causing a lot of fear in the area at times. If you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, you know that those are the dudes who do really nasty stuff. To further on, as I learned more about the immigration side and how we were deporting some of the MS-13 down to El Salvador and causing commotion there and the history there, it's like, man, these guys spread like wildfire, and they kind of blew up out of nowhere from when I grew up. Now we're dealing with a new threat, TDA, Tren de Aragua, it's starting to feel very similar. I'm curious to know your experience with MS-13 and what you see right now with TDA. Does it feel very familiar, and are you very fearful and worried about what this looks like in the future?
I'm incredibly fearful about what the future holds for this country when it comes to TDA. So Tren de Aragua is originated from Venezuela. A lot of the Venezuelan government, President Maduro and all his administration, they support TDA and their movement across the South America and Central America, Mexico, and then into the United States. They want to cause havoc. They want to create the disruption that's all occurring. But TDA is fairly new to the United States. They're not new to Chile, Peru, Colombia. They're not new down there. This has been an ongoing threat and scourge of criminal activity, especially in Chile. That's where I'm from. My family's from Chile. My father's from Argentina, and I've spoken with Chilean law enforcement, and they have been combating this exactly what we've got going on here in this country. The hotel in Aurora, the houses of prostitution in Texas, the criminal activity in New York City, Times Square. All of this has been occurring for years in Chile. And the reason why it's happening is because in Chile, the TDA members moved south from Venezuela into Peru, into Chile, and they were conducting their criminal activity. And then once the authorities in each one of these countries got wind of them, got their name, got their ID and charges, TDA would pick them up and moved them north through Mexico into the United States. So here, what we're getting now are experienced, transnational criminal organization members, TCO members, that have already earned their bucks, have already cut their teeth on other victims down in South America. Now, I am very, very much a way of calling this a gang because they are transnational criminal organization. They work to move forward their organization, and they are transnational. They worked across the continents. They are communicating. They're using high-tech communication. There are a lot of people out there that will say that TDA is not sophisticated. That's furthest from the truth. They're sophisticated. They're utilizing crypto. They're utilizing money laundering to further their cause. But what surprises me is this. Last year, right at the end of my career, I attended a conference in South America. There were almost representatives from every country. I represented the United States and the FBI, and I was down there to understand this new group called Tren de Aragua. At this conference, they were telling us that, yes, TDA had moved into southern Texas and southern Florida. That was it. That was spring of 2023. The fact that we now have probably 3,000 to 5,000 members of TDA here in the United States doesn't happen naturally, doesn't happen. And something happened, and it was the open border. The number of migrants that were coming across the border and in there were, active TDA members. These members of the Tren de Aragua are trained, hardened warriors. They're trained by Venezuelan military. Why? Because Maduro wants good fighters out there. And that's why, President-elect Trump is saying that the prisons are empty, because Maduro is emptying the prisons and pushing them forward. And Tren de Aragua is bringing a lot of these individuals to the border for them to cross in the United States. TDA has moved across this country to different communities, Venezuelan communities. I know for a fact that they are up here in Bozeman, Montana. There's a Venezuelan community here, Venezuelan, Hondurans, and Mexicans in Bozeman. The reason why they're here is doing construction. And let me be clear on this. You've got all the migrants that are coming across the border. A vast majority, for me, it's 90% of the people that are coming across the border are good people just looking for a better opportunity. For me, it's the 10% rule. There are 10% of these migrants crossing are here for other nefarious reasons, whether it be gang members, terrorist organizations, or other criminal entities coming into the United States to take advantage of us. TDA are amongst those. So I believe at this time, there's somewhere in the 3,000 to 5,000. That does not include all the younger ones or the other recruits that they're recruiting. So TDA member may be in the Roosevelt Hotel in New York City. One member may be there, but he may recruit 12, a dozen 13-year-olds to go out into Times Square, do pickpocketing, and they're 13 years old. They're not going to get charged by the DA for robbery, theft, or anything along those lines. So they're able to return back to the Roosevelt Hotel. but that's going on in communities all across this country. So TDA really is becoming a big threat to this country, and their criminal activity is transnational. I know for a fact that there were kidnappings in South America that the ransom is being collected here in the United States. So there's an individual is being kidnapped down there, but there's ransom being collected by TDA members here in the United States. So there's definite communication, there's definite money laundering, there's weapons, sex trafficking, drugs. TDA took the model that you just referenced of MS-13, figured out what they did wrong, what they did right, and then improved on it. So that's why I think it's a danger. And this is not just merely a street gang of how MS-13 started, just being music, loving music and being
Yeah.
they're supportive for one another in the prisons. That's how a gang started. This is different. This is a criminal organization that also, let's be very clear, does the bidding of Nicolas Maduro when he wants to. He will task TDA to conduct an assassination in Chile. They did it last year. They assassinated a lieutenant for the Venezuelan army who was a dissident. They kidnapped him, tortured him, killed him, and that was a message from Maduro to those who oppose him. So it's definitely a threat, and we need to be careful.
Yeah, you say that you've heard that they're in Bozeman. I know that they're here in Dallas. We've seen them in El Paso. We've seen them across the nation. How are they able to spread so fast?
I think it's just amongst the Venezuelan community. They're able to blend in. How do the Border Patrol, your counterparts, your CBP, or ERO, how do they know when an individual is encountered? They don't know that it's a TDA member. All they know is they're aware, so they're approaching the border. Everybody knows the system. Everybody knows how it works. Come up to the border, you get printed. If there's an encounter, then you get photographed, printed, and then where are you heading? And then you get an NTA, notice to appear, which at this point is 9 to 10 years away. So you're getting an NTA and you're saying, well, I'm going to go to New Jersey. Okay, well, there's no checking to go to New Jersey, but you know where the Venezuelan communities are. They know where it is. So they're moving in there and they're embedding themselves. And the problem is this: the notoriety and everyone in these Venezuelan communities know the danger and the threat that TDA is. Same thing as MS-13, used to do in 2015, 2016. There were MS-13 members inside the El Salvadorian communities, but people would not speak out because out of the fear that those MS-13 members would get word back to the homeland and members of their family would get hurt. Same thing here. People are afraid to A, get deported, and if they were to speak to law enforcement, and B, they're afraid to point a TDA member out because out of fear that they may get hurt or their families back in Venezuela will get hurt themselves. So there's a lot of motivation for them to keep their mouth shut. So they're able to move into the communities and then begin extorting small things, extortion, criminal activity. And then it all depends on the community. Obviously, Aurora, Colorado, a lot more density, a lot more people. So they're able to take over an apartment building. And Bozeman, Montana, you wouldn't be able to get away with that. So they're doing other criminal activity up here. But they're handcuffed up here, unlike in Texas where you are. You've got a lot of Hispanic-speaking law enforcement officers, so they're able to infiltrate. They're able to get recruit sources. That, to me, was what I found is my number one ability, to be able to speak to members of the community and convince them to flip, work for me, even be a pocket source. Here in Montana, it's a little bit more difficult. They haven't encountered that, so there's difficulties to get into that. They're working with CJNG, they're working with Sinaloa. There's clear cooperation amongst them to move through Mexico, move the migrant train. So there's cooperation in how they're getting into the country, and they're going to Venezuelan strongholds. So that's how they're able to blend.
They're recruiting a lot of some of the young kids. Is there anything that's going to stop that? Because I know that they're doing a lot of in New York. There's reports of prostitution rings or sex trafficking rings. Luring some of these women in with the promise to a better life. And the same with some of these kids, they're giving them opportunities. But is there anything that's going to stop them from recruiting? Is there anything in place that, like, I don't know, prosecutions that'll fight against these kids that are at these camps, right? These holding. I just feel like there's a lot of vulnerabilities there, and somehow they're able to kind of dominate in that space.
Yeah, well, it's part domination, part out of fear, because they can, the fear out of what can happen to me. Because let's say you have a Venezuelan community and they point out one person. Well, there's 15 other TDA members or associates that are standing right next to that guy, And they know that if they point out that one, the other 14 may take out retribution on the person who's providing information. So they're able to hide under the blanket of their own community if law enforcement isn't able to penetrate that community. From what I understand, it is very, very difficult to get a TDA member to even admit that they're a member of TDA, either it be post arrest or during. So getting somebody to flip and infiltrate these communities is very difficult. The houses of prostitution we're seeing in El Paso, the hotels in the apartment complexes in Aurora, which I knew about Aurora about 6 months before it broke in the news because the building owners had reached out to me. They knew I was retired. They knew my background, and they reached out to me saying, "Hey, what can we do?" And I'd seen the evidence. I talked to people, and I worked with that. And the fact that you have Aurora government and the PD saying there's nothing to see here, nothing to see here, is shocking. So you're not only fighting the gang or the criminal organization, but you're also fighting the political element here in the United States because they don't want it. They don't want the aura that there's a criminal element in their midst. That's whether it be criminal element or whether it be because it's racially not prudent for them. So it's a difficult combination, and then figuring out how these the houses of prostitution, these are the things that they really thrive upon, that they're really making a lot of money, is getting a Venezuelan young woman to come to the United States, and they'll smuggle her through the United States and say, you got to work for us for 2 years, and then that 2 years becomes 4 years. Now the young ones in New York City or Chicago or Denver or LA, those kids, they're 12 to 14 years old. They're not old enough to work at construction. They're not old enough to do manual labor. So they've been brought across either by themselves or with their families. And let's see, do I go to school or do I work for a criminal organization that's being lauded in the media and we can make some money? I can get fear and other people will fear me at 12 years
Yeah.
old. That's the gold. That's the gold. It's a diamond. You're getting feared as a 12-year-old. As we were
Yeah.
talking about previously, social media feeds this. You're looking at, wow, Tren de Aragua, that's feared. Okay, those are the guys I want to be part of. Everybody wants to be
Yeah.
part of the varsity team. Everybody wants to be part of the cool guys, and this is what they
Yeah.
see as the cool team.
It's been crazy to watch some of the things that happen in American cities. So I'll get back to Aurora because I want to talk about that in a second. But some insider information that I received through friends of friends, that some of the high schools in El Paso currently are being dominated by these cartels because these kids are being paid so well to just run drugs. And since they're minors, it's always a slap on the wrist for them. And that it's not just one kid. Most of the males in these high schools on the border towns on the west side, east side, doesn't matter, are involved in some capacity, and they recruit within each other. Like, oh yeah, if this kid's wearing Jordans, he's driving a nice car, what's he getting into? And boom, just the fame and notoriety of being part of the narco culture has been what's driving recruitment almost easier. The
Yeah,
TikTok, the the Snapchats, all that showing it, it's what's been driving their recruitment. I don't understand, I just find it like it should be easier to get information on this to kind of slowly start breaking it down. And I don't understand why some of these cities are having so much trouble doing that.
I think that you hit upon a lot of good notes there. That I think that the fact of the notoriety on the internet, the social media, the bluster, but what's I hate to say it, but brilliant about the cartels and TDA is that they're looking at where their vulnerabilities are. For example, here in Montana, we have Native American reservations. We got the reservations up here up north, the Crows, and you've got Blackfeet down south. They're going out to the reservations from what I understand, cartel, and they're going out there and they're saying they're finding a Native American woman who has a house, and the cartel is going and just throwing down money and saying, "Marry me." What's that woman going to do? Of course, she's going to say yes because this guy just threw down tens of thousands of dollars and now she has a financial stability. So, of course, she's going to say yes. And then he gets married and now he's in on the reservation. As one of your previous guests had said, a fentanyl pill is $6 to $8 down in Texas. It's $100 up here in Montana. So there's a massive, massive amount of ROI on for the cartels up here. And the glorification of the cartel moon, the glorification of money, cars. This is it's just 15 seconds. Everybody wants the 15 seconds of fame, and just it's the short term. What the kids don't understand these days is the 12 to 14-year-olds is so these TDA members, they're not like MS-13, which is 17, 18-year-olds recruiting 12 and 13. These are 26, 27, 28-year-olds, veterans of either the Venezuelan military or veterans of, TDA back in South America. What the kids of 12, 13, 14 don't understand is they're being used. But that's the problem, is they don't understand they're being used just kind of like a tissue paper. Hey, if we lose him, okay, it's just a 12-year-old. It's no big deal. And they don't give enough information to these 12 years old and to say, okay, this is my name, ID, location. So these kids are not a threat to the gang, to the criminal organization. They're not a threat to, get brought down. They're trusted enough to do the minor petty thefts, minor petty crimes. If they are eventually able to get to 18, 19 years old, they've been a member of the organization now for 6, 7 years. Then he's moved up in status. But it's unfortunate that these 12, 13, 14-year-olds are just getting recruited, like you said, the glorification. Hey, I'd rather just quick money. Ooh, I got $500 in my pocket, where my dad has to work, 3 days for that kind of cash and he has to pay taxes. Where I got this now, I'm stronger. I got a bigger bad phone, bigger bad car. So it's tough.
Yeah, in the Aurora case, what is it about? Like I kept watching, like, why can't law enforcement go in and just stop it right then? What's stopping these states or these cities and law enforcement to just step in and just break it up?
Well, here's the problem. So there was multiple problems in the Aurora situation. So problem number one was that the building managers got to me too late. When they called me, they were 1 week away from shutting down the building. So they shut the 3 buildings down. So there are 3 buildings in Aurora that were suspected that have been taken over by TDA. The building owners had decided they were throwing up their arms because they were getting extorted by TDA. TDA had come to them and said, hey, listen, we're going to collect the rent from now on. You'll get 50% of what we collect. We're going to keep the other 50%. So the building owners were being extorted themselves. So they were running the buildings and they were controlling it. No one was talking to local law enforcement because, from the building, because out of fear that they were going to, that's their home. So they would rather pay, just like I've seen countless times in New Jersey, extortion. People just pay, hey, just take my $100. I don't care. I don't want any trouble, because that's their home.
Yeah.
So by the time they got to me, it was too late. But the Aurora, Colorado gang world, I've known that for years. I've known it going back to mid 2015, 2014. I knew there was a gang problem from New Jersey. I knew there was a gang problem in Aurora, Colorado. I knew MS-13 would move out there. So it's nothing new. But a lot of mayors, a lot of police force don't want to admit that there's a gang problem, because that'll hurt their bottom line or hurt people moving into the community. It'll put a fear. Elizabeth, New Jersey, one of the most difficult places to live. It is extremely criminal, lots of criminal elements there. And in 2011, the mayor of Elizabeth, New Jersey, where there was tons of criminal gang investigations that I would work with Elizabeth PD, the mayor of Elizabeth, New Jersey came out and said, we have no gangs in Elizabeth, which is the most absurd statement to ever probably make. But he admitted, he said, no, there's no gangs here in Elizabeth, nothing to see. So I found that the Aurora situation was just a repeat, just rinse repeat of politicians just saying, nothing to see here. No, there's no gang problem. There's just a few. A great example of how the political element can affect the law enforcement element was the press conference, and I'm putting quotes around here, the press situation that the acting chief of police at Aurora PD did. So days after that video was released, with the gang members being seen walking the hallways with long guns and knocking on doors,
Yep.
the chief, who was the acting chief at the time, she went to the building and she put out a video statement saying, we are here, we're listening to the community, there's nothing to see, we don't see any gang elements. Well, here's the problem with that. This was days after that video was released. So was TDA going to do? They're going to vacate, they're going to get out of there. So they probably got out of there. But that's not real problem. The problem was this. What they failed to have told the media was that, first of all, that crew, that media crew, was actually the police department's press office. So they were recording it themselves. So they were able to edit it and record it. But what they didn't say is that SWAT teams cleared the buildings, before she arrived. There were SWAT teams that walked the buildings. So of course there isn't going to be a criminal element. Second, she stood in front of not one of the three buildings that were suspected of being taken over. She was standing in front of a completely opposite building. And third, the video camera was recording police officers knocking on the door saying, "Hey, do you have any problems here?" Of course, those people are going to say, "No, there's no problems here," because they're on camera. No one's going to admit to tell the truth, which I found absolutely absurd. So those three or four things was encapsulated Aurora in a perfect capsule going, okay, listen, these were rats inside of a box. You shine the light on it, they scattered. So they've all gone elsewhere. And that's why when the building managers called me and they said we're shutting down the building, I was frustrated because I wanted to say, no, let me talk to FBI Denver. I still have friends there. Let me see if they can get them to run, work with you, and then you guys do an investigation. Because if they close the building, those guys are going to scatter. All the targets are going to scatter, and there's nowhere to collect the intelligence, the information. So
Yeah.
it was difficult. And that's why I find it the Aurora situation was a problem. And all those members, all those guys with guns, yes, some of them were taken into custody after the fact. Everybody was all, FBI Denver, HSI, Aurora PD, we're all, let's get a task force together. But that was after the fact. They should have done it months earlier when I know that the building managers complained and filed a complaint and sat with law enforcement entities there in Denver saying, hey, we have a problem here. But no one really did anything about it. I know for a fact, having been working this for 12 years and still working after the fact, I know for a fact that federal law enforcement looks upon Hispanic investigations of Hispanic organized crime, gangs, as secondary. For why, I don't know. I assume it's the language barrier. That's the only thing I could think of, but it's always looked at as after the fact. Bloods, Crips, English speaking organizations, mafia, those always get top tier. But a Hispanic element, well, if we have the time, and that's a growing community here in this country, it's only going to get worse if we don't pay attention. And that's why I think, going back to what you're saying, do I think it's going to get worse? Yes, I think it's going to get worse before it gets better.
That's crazy to hear. I've never heard anything like that. And to know, I mean, obviously, I believe you, and that's nuts. That's nuts for the Hispanic.
It's because I've counted. So I was very, very aggressive as an agent. I was very good. These investigations never came to the federal, unless you go out there turning over rocks. You had to go out there, be in the community, become friends with the local cops, and get somebody to provide you information on a possible element. The cases never came to you. There were other cases, in the English speaking gangs or English speaking organized crime that did just come to the FBI. There would be somebody filing a complaint. So it was a different environment. And it was, I know no division, FBI division, that is big enough to have a Hispanic, gang unit. But I was the only one in FBI Newark headquarters. The other RAs, the resident agencies throughout New Jersey, had an agent who may have it on the side. There were a couple really good agents down in Red Bank and then in Trenton, if they had the time, or because number one thing, language barrier. The language barrier,
Yeah.
language barrier, language barrier. If you didn't have a Hispanic speaking agent, you weren't getting anywhere. You were not getting anywhere. And in Newark, there were maybe 2 or 3 agents that spoke Spanish and worked gangs and understood it. The other Hispanic speaking agents were working some other criminal matter because they didn't want to work the Hispanic gang organized crime. So it's a combination of FBI headquarters putting out saying that's tier 2, that's not important. And it was throughout my career. I mean, there's no doubt about it that it was always second fiddle to other. Not saying that it wasn't important. If there was an agent who was aggressive enough and said, this is important, U.S. Attorney's Office always would be great. I had no problem with the U.S. Attorney's Office in New Jersey taking my cases. I had it all, very nicely wrapped up with a bow of RICO cases for them. But FBI Newark and FBI headquarters. There was always an element of like, all right, let Dan worry about that. And okay, well, and if Dan goes away, hey, maybe the cases will go away. So it was difficult.
We don't just do the filmmaking. We do everything. We've taken a case study of over 30 projects that we've done over the past 15 years, and we put together what we believe is the most effective and efficient content funnel for brands. They need content on a daily basis. They need to be talking to authentic end users. We want your team to bring its most challenging problems and allow us and our team to apply our proven methods to your brand to take it to another level.
I've been doing a lot of studying and investigating on the tactics, almost like the militarization of some of the cartels. What are their potential skill sets, and the level of training they might have had? Is there anything or any kind of information on TDA having a militarized background or militarized training that could be of concern? Because watching the video in Aurora, these are low level dudes. The way they hold the rifles, they're just punk kids with guns. Essentially, is what it felt to me. But I guess where my mind goes as a special operations guy, as an operator in the border patrol, I'm always thinking, like, if we had to connect, a SWAT team to this, is there a potential for the higher level guys to have a sort of training that could be a real threat? I'd love to know what you know on that aspect.
Well, I definitely say that these guys are definitely receiving training when they're in Venezuela. We know that they have received paramilitary training from the Venezuelan military. Not every single one of them, but there are a certain number of them that received higher military training, paramilitary training, or they were former military in the Venezuelan army. That's not to say all 3,000 or 5,000 of them are, paramilitary trained, but they do have an element to it. What also concerns me is their cooperation with CJNG and Sinaloa. Everyone knows CJNG's ability, capability for equipment, capability for training, and MS-13 themselves. They live in Mexico. A lot of the middle management lives in Mexico. TDA clearly moving through there, so they have access to firearms. They have access to higher weaponry. Do I think that we're going to see the type of firefights that are going on right now in Mexico? No, I don't think we're going to see that on the streets of Mexico, or excuse me, on the streets of the United States. I do think that you put one of those, advanced military trained members inside a large community like New York City or Chicago, then they're able to spread, even take one guy takes it to 10 people, and they provide mid-level training. That's more than any other MS-13 little street gangbanger has gotten in most of their life. So yeah, I think that there's a potential danger for the future. I don't foresee open warfare like we're seeing in Mexico. I just don't see that. The amount of law enforcement and military cover which we have here in the United States, I just don't see that.
Yeah. I like that. I like that point where, MS-13 was just street gang. They never were military background individuals. They were usually just the trouble kids who joined the gang, and it got bigger and bigger from there, from recruitment. The TDA now does have a background in some military, and that does make a concern. Yeah, that's a great point, and that definitely answers my question.
Well, one of the things I found is what they're doing is they've got a huge, obviously they're making money off drug trafficking, their money off of human smuggling. But what people aren't aware of is that, Maduro, there's so much gold in Venezuela. And Nicolas Maduro has reportedly given number of mines to TDA in Western Venezuela and said, here, these mines are yours. You mine them as you please, and all the proceeds go to you. So this is his way of paying them. So the TDA will mine the gold, and then turn and sell that gold in the United States or Europe, and then turn those funds back into the organization. So they're utilizing funding from these gold mines in Western Venezuela. This is not a secret. I mean, it's been reported that it's happening in Colombia. Different cartels are doing it. The Chinese have had mines that they've taken over in Ecuador or Colombia. And so it's happening in Venezuela. So they've got deep pockets of funding when they want to. And that's what I'm saying is this is not going away anytime
Wow.
soon.
Yeah, that's interesting, because you said Maduro is supporting them. I wasn't sure in what kind of aspect that was, just in the fact, but to be able to give them access to something like that, so precious metals, and we know how the precious metals do so well in sales, that's different. I've never heard of that before, and that makes it even more interesting. I would love to understand the hierarchy of this. I'm not sure if you know that or not, or like who's controlling this. We don't have a name yet, but there's some kind of structure to passing down information, to getting things done, to creating almost this, they're in itself, TDA is not considered a cartel, correct? They're just considered almost a
Correct.
transnational organization.
Correct. Yeah, the Biden administration designated them a transnational criminal organization. I know Governor Abbott in Texas designated them a terrorist group. I don't know about that. I don't know if we go that far with these guys, but there's definitely a TCO. That's the Biden administration, and then obviously that will get carried into, I assume, the Trump administration.
What is it? What does that do for us? We identify them as a transnational criminal organization.
It's
What powers does that give us in the United States?
it's
And
money.
why haven't other organizations been deemed this? Sureños, gang members, whatever the case. Why does TDA get the attention right now and not some of the other gang members who've been associated with cartels?
Well, I believe basically it's just what pot you draw the money from, where investigators draw the money from. So whether you have to justify it to be able to get to certain pots. And as you well know, government is all about money and different pots. So there's this pot of money over here to defeat transnational criminal organizations, whereas this pot over here is to defeat gangs. So maybe smaller pot over here, whereas investigators now have a bigger pot if they're able to justify it's a TCO. Um, the as far as the hierarchy, so MS-13 is very, very much structural. You did not do something here in the United States without approval from higher ups. If they wanted to do an assassination, if you wanted to do drug trafficking, you had to report to your program manager, and the program manager had to report it to higher ups in El Salvador. And then it had to come back and forth saying approved, disapproved, don't do it. And if you crossed the senior management, I know cases where they came in, they took out the first word of a click of MS-13 in Boston or in New Jersey, and because he disobeyed direct orders. TDA is a little bit different. TDA is a little bit different because I think my opinion is because of the age and experience. So you're finding 26, 27-year-olds where TDA is pushing them out. I don't think that there's somebody at a big map in Venezuela saying, let's put a TDA member here in Montana. I think they're looking at where the Venezuelan communities are and they're saying, okay, let's move somebody up there. But I think it's to the bottom line is saying, listen, you are a member of TDA, go forth and make us money, and then we'll communicate with you. But I don't believe that there is a order structure, kind of like MS-13. It's more of a release and cause chaos, and then bring back some of the money back to us, and then they can reinvest into the organization. So I know that there have been recent grabs in Colombia, senior leaders who were hiding in Colombia. So there have been recent grabs there. I know that some leadership is still in Venezuela, and then there is some leadership in Peru. I don't know about higher leadership in Chile, but they're spread out about. So exactly the exact chain of command is still very fluid depending on who you talk to, but there is a hierarchy and a structure.
Is there any intelligence that some of the criminal organization, the money that they receive goes back to Venezuela and helping Maduro with his plans of however it is, like using those funds in the government of Venezuela?
I don't have any information on that, whether it's actually going back to the pockets of Maduro. But I think that you have to look at it as, is it financially benefiting him or politically benefiting him? The assassination and the fear that TDA can impose may be worth money to Maduro and his government saying, okay, you can't run from me. So that I'd say is almost worth money itself.
Yeah.
So I haven't heard of any money that's actually going back to Maduro's pockets. I think Maduro is just saying, hey, listen, I'm getting these elements out of my country and I'm going off, letting them go off and create chaos in other countries that I oppose to, America, Peru, Chile. So, it's a win-win for him.
What do you think we have to do to help stop this? How do we slow down the growth of TDA and completely, hopefully, dismantle them so they're not an issue for us in the future?
I think that's going to be a very difficult. That's going to be a very difficult process, um, because it's twofold. People. Whether we, how they close the border. Starting January 21st. I'd love. I'm curious to see if where they shut down the border or shut immigration, but people are still going to get through it. People are still going to get on. On non-encounters. You're still going to come across, not in the numbers that we've seen in the last 4 years, but people are still going to get across. And we don't know what we don't know. So the Venezuelan members that are, the TDA members that are here in the Venezuelan community, the deportation, which, Borders are Holman is proposing, it's going to be very difficult. I mean, even to deport, I think the number was if they wanted to deport 1 million a year, it would be 2,000 a day. Well, my first question is, where are you going to deport them to? Let's just talk about the Venezuelans. Where are you going to deport them to? Because Venezuela is not taking them. So I know that there was discussion about deporting them to another country in South America or in the islands, the Caribbean, where there'll be an agreement. There's just so much that these countries can take. I mean, let's say we deport 2,000 a day. It's still physically, unable to take that numbers. But
go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, what I think will happen, and this is just speculation, just seeing from the past, I think the private prisons are going to start housing them until they actually can find a location to put them. So I think it's going to be detention first, then find. That's it. Just what I think.
Huge. No. I know in New Jersey, a lot of prisons in New Jersey, county prisons. I know Union County and I believe Passaic County. Those are two jails that are shut down now because of the state just, they consolidated all in Bergen County Jail. So you got two fully run, ready to go jails that are completely empty. So I believe that those are going to get contracted out and will be taken over. But there's still the element of like, how do we find these members? How do we know? And it go back to what I stated earlier, is getting somebody from that Venezuelan community to go, that's the member, is going to be extraordinarily difficult to get that to happen. Because, like I said, they point out that one member, there's 19 others that are still there, they don't know about, that are going to so those people are not going to have it, because not to mention, people inside these Venezuelan communities now have a fear of that they will get deported. They're going to be deported. So they don't want to snitch to law enforcement and possibly get themselves deported. So they're just going to stay silent. So getting into these communities, to do these sweeps, the easy ones are the guys that are, either ready to go to jail, or we have, for some odd reason, we know their address. So yes, there's going to be a couple 100,000, which we're going to be able to hit within the first year. But I think it's going to be very, very difficult. And how do we get it? More law enforcement that speak Spanish. It still gets to the bottom of it. And still, it's been a problem since I was recruited 20 years ago. And it's still a problem today, is getting law enforcement to speak Spanish. And that's going to be the number one hurdle.
My fear with the mass deportations is the public optics of what that looks like, and losing a lot of people's support because it just looks bad. And how do you do that in a good way? I don't know. How do you fucking deport that many people appropriately where it feels right? It's going to be that's the biggest challenge.
We're still talking about the family separation, the chain link fence. We're still showing photos about that. This is 4 years later, 5 years later. We're still talking about that. And here's like you said, even the threats of, deporting naturally born citizens here of illegal migrants who are born here in the United States, and the threat that, we'll deport them too. That's just like, I'm trying to wrap my head around it and saying, listen, the administration was elected in. I'd love to see, what the plan is, but I agree with you. It's the optics are going to be horrific. And, we have how many millions of people here in this country that are, entered illegally, 15 million just in the last 4 years. The optics, don't even talk to me about, the jails are for, the first tier, the criminal elements. But what about everybody else? Are you going to talk internment camps? Are we going to be talking, they can build a, you know, what do you call it? Internment camps out in the middle of Pennsylvania, Homeland Security camps run by FEMA. There's lots of bad kryptonite that you can touch. It's a third rail. It's very bad. And there's an election in 2 years that if this goes bad, the Congress could flip back. And so he has to be able to dance the fine line.
Yeah, I have no idea what that looks like. I want what's good for the country. And, Tom Homan is a very aggressive man. And I think I think they're smarter than that. They know they don't want to create this very negative buzz towards this, but I don't know how you do this in a way that feels
Right.
humane. I don't know what that looks like. And so, yeah, I'm curious to see what it is. But there has to be something in place where we can identify who is a criminal element. All these bad dudes, and it takes law enforcement is going to have to be out there doing their job, like adamantly looking for the bad guy. And then once they can identify like that's an illegal immigrant, well, then we're going to have to do the job of getting them deported.
See, I see two problems with that, with what you're talking about. One, you're asking local law enforcement to identify certain, but who controls you? The government of your city. So whether it be a Democratic or Republican, in Chicago, you may not get that. And obviously, clearly in Denver, what they're saying, so you may not get the Denver PD, calling ICE up at 2 a.m. And the second problem I find is this: we don't have the infrastructure in the courts. Each of these individuals have
Correct.
a right to see an immigration judge. We just don't have the infrastructure. So let's put aside the criminal element. Yes, everybody that entered the United States has violated a federal law. Yes, I get that. But I'm not talking about those people. I'm talking about the people that are here, gang members, organized crime, terrorists, those things. That 10%, which I was talking about earlier. If we forget those people, and we just talk about the 90% of person that just came into this country, they've got a job doing cleaning houses, putting up drywall, some other manual labor job. They get encountered. So they're supposed to be arrested. Okay, you put them in custody in jail. How long before all these jails get filled up real quick? And because they don't see a judge, they don't have time. You're talking months. So you're going to detain somebody for months. Then let's go on even further. Let's say some of these individuals are Venezuelan, Cuban, countries that are not going to accept an illegal immigrant, or one of their former countrymen. Well, then I've talked to ERO officers. They're saying, okay, well, the process is if there's a final order of deportation, which takes months to get to that point, a final order. If you get to that point, but they can't deport them, then they get reverted back to a jail that are housed for 30 days. And then if they and they're still not deported, then they get released into the United States with we just need your phone number. So they're just right back into the
whole thing's a mess.
So, yeah.
The whole thing's a mess. We have to be able to build relationships with other countries so we can repatriate their citizens, but that's a challenge. I worked in the private prison, and I worked in a private prison because it was the fastest job I can get out of the military that paid decent. They're like $23 an hour. I'm like, hell yes. I had no idea anything of what I was doing. They explained it to me like, oh, the state pays and this. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Now, as I'm much more mature and I'm not chasing just the $23 an hour, I'm like, man, that's kind of a screwed up concept. When you privatize prisons, it starts to make it feel ugly. Where like now you make money off imprisoning people.
Yeah.
That's crazy. But then half of the prison I worked at was an immigration contract. So we had they called them paisas is what they labeled them as, right? Mm-hmm. And what we had was a lot of Mexican nationals and other immigrants who came here illegally, who were housed in there right next to guys who were there for smuggling dope, right next to guys who were in there for murder. Yep. And they're all just waiting their time for their hearing. And which some of these individuals who were there illegally were there for over a year. And what was even more fascinating about this is that these individuals who ordered chips or any kind of like bubble gum, they would use the wrapper and they would turn it into a nice little purse. And then they'd ship it back to their fucking country so that their family can sell it to Americans who were there on vacation. And I was like, what? The crazy circle of all of this is madness. And I didn't put two and two together until I joined the Border Patrol, and I was like, oh my God. A lot of the people that we were apprehending were going to these private prisons because there's nowhere else to house them while
Right.
they waited their hearing on deportation. And some of them were there for 3 months. And if they appealed it, it would be 6 months. And some of them even longer because whatever happens with their case. And so now we're housing these individuals and there is no other, we had no other housing that would be suffice for this situation, which makes it just a confusing overall situation.
Yeah, no, it's crazy the situation, like you said, the prisons. And I know in New Jersey, you got Essex County, which is county jail, but there's a immigration wing, and then right as I was going out, that wing was shrinking. I'm sure it's going to go back. You got empty jails in Union County, Passaic County. So the crazy of moving the chips around is absolutely it's insane these days, and bringing this into this community now, this world now, of where we're going is going to be, like you said, we were talking about. This is going to be the question. I really am curious to see how this is turned. I'm sure they have a plan in section in effect that they're going to execute on day one, but it's something I don't know.
Yeah. Circling back to Venezuela, are they becoming kind of the next national security threat to the U.S., Venezuelans themselves, because they might have ties to TDA?
I would go as far as to say yes. I would say yes because and that's why I'm so, and I'm not speaking for myself. I'm speaking for a lot of other agents that I still speak with, who are working these investigations, and we're trying to, I'm trying to get out here on your podcast, and I appreciate you bringing me on to talk about this because getting the right word out there is what every single one of them is saying, just get out there and you know, make the word about Tren de Aragua and how bad of a threat this is. Because yes, because not only are they organized, they're sophisticated, they've got funding, but they're an element, an arm of a government who has a full interest in destabilizing us. So if you've got 3 to 5,000 members, let's go into let's put it into effect. And I know that there are military aged men from the Chinese government, but if you had 3 to 5,000 members of Al Qaeda inside the United States, do you think we would be getting a little more attention on this? Do you think that we would have 3 to 5,000 members of ISIS inside the United States? Those groups want to conduct attacks, explosions, create havoc. Yes, these guys are doing it at a much smaller scale, but if you look at all of it, it's all as a pot. It is a huge threat and it's taking thousands, millions of dollars from U.S. citizens. It poses a threat. They're smuggling their own people and providing the houses of prostitution here in the United States within these, and they're exploiting young women here in the United States, and they're doing it. There's human smuggling going across this country because TDA is taking advantage of the system. They know how to work it. They know how to take advantage of our system. Yes, I do think that this is a destabilizing group that could be a very much a national security threat to our country if they get into places, if they get into create more havoc, and God forbid they have support from Venezuela or North Korea or Iran, where they could do cyber attacks. There's no reason why they can't get orders to conduct more destabilizing attacks here in the United States. So yeah, I think that is definitely a national security threat.
Man, I appreciate your time with me today, Daniel. This was fascinating, awesome information. I hope that tons of people come see this. If there's anything else out there down the road, please give me a call. We'll throw you back on here and let's talk about it.
Absolutely, Rock. I appreciate it, man. Thanks a lot. And anybody that, like I said, I'm more than happy to help out. Help out people at the same time. I like helping you out, helping anybody else. I'm more than happy to travel, get on Zoom, reach out. I put out a newsletter once or twice a week on my Substack. It's brunersierragroup.substack.com. I put out, I talk about these things and these things, so you can stay ahead of it and stay ahead of the curve and understanding it. So please feel free to reach out anytime.
Where can our viewers find you or website they can kind of contact you, excuse me?
So my website is brunersierragroup.com. We're based out here out of Bozeman. So we're a forensic accounting, which is my wife. She's the brilliant one. She does forensic accounting. I do the national security consulting for clients and providing them guidance on how to, to proceed through life, whether it be executive protection, K9, which I have access to all of these things. So BrunnerSierraGroup.com. I'm on LinkedIn, Daniel Brunner, and on the Substack, BrunnerSierraGroup.substack.com. Those are my 3 groups. We don't do, Instagram or the other social media. So we keep the business above there. So, but anybody, feel free to reach out.
Thank you for listening to Borderland, an Ironclad original. Don't forget to like and share. Tell your friends. See you next time.